Check. Hello, everyone. First off, I just want to say thank you for being here. This is my first Fireside chat, so I do apologize if it's not great. This is the only thing I'm going to read. The rest of it's just, like I said, it's going to be a casual conversation. So we're pleased to welcome today Adrian Wojnarowski. He is one of the most respected and influential journalists in sports media today. As ESPN's senior NBA insider, before his retirement last year, he was widely recognized as the leading authority on basketball news and information, breaking many of the league's biggest stories and providing in-depth analysis across the ESPN platforms. Known to fans simply as Woj, his timely and trusted reporting has set the standard for NBA coverage and transformed how breaking news reaches audiences. Before joining ESPN, Adrian was an award-winning columnist and reporter for outlets such as Yahoo Sports, The Record of New Jersey, and he is also the author of the New York Times bestseller, The Miracle of St. Anthony, A Season with Coach Bob Hurley, and basketball's most improbable dynasty that captures, through this incredible story, how sports, mentorship, structure, and community can transform lives. In September 2024, Woj retired from journalism career to return to his alma mater, St. Bonaventure, as the general manager of the men's basketball program. And just so you guys know, my introduction to Woj was through John Ikpotikin, who is one of his current players that they have on their roster, and that's how he and I have created this relationship. And Woj's shift from leading a media beat to shaping the athletic program reflects his enduring dedication to the sport and to nurturing future generations of basketball talent. So please help me in welcoming Adrian Wojnarowski to Rossi. I was driving here with him. I was like, whoa, I've never done this before. He's just like, just keep it a conversation. So first off, welcome to Rossi, New Brunswick. And I guess my first question is, what's your first impression traveling the beautiful Trans-Canada Highway from Moncton to here and campus?
Yeah, it's beautiful. My wife Amy is here with me, and just in the last week I started the week in Calgary. And I've been in Toronto, and now I'm all the way east. It was funny, the first time I called John, or we agreed to talk about a time, I didn't get that it was in the Atlantic time zone, further east, and I kept screwing it up, and so.
That extra hour is really important.
Yeah, and so, but it's beautiful. It's the campus is beautiful, seeing the river and just the drive and the foliage. This is obviously a great time of year. I know, same with us in St. Bonaventure in upstate New York and here. Check back in January, right? So it looks a little different.
So, first time I met Woj, it was completely random, and it was something that kind of confused me. So, Elias, who's a mutual contact of ours, had texted me and said, "Hey, are you free for a FaceTime?" And I said, "Sure." And Elias, who works for North Pole Hoops, who is our league, and normally it's a kid or a coach, and then all of a sudden your face pops up, and I was just kind of starstruck, right? I was just like, oh my goodness. And I imagine just jumping into a joke, just kind of because I was so nervous, and saying, "Do you have any good Woj bombs for me?" And then thinking to myself, how many times has this guy heard this joke? So once again, I really, getting to know you and you agreed to come here, I just really wanted to say thanks. And certainly, first thing I want to jump into is, obviously you're a basketball nut, or as the kids say, a basketball sicko. And you know the sport really well, but how did it all start? Like, where did your journalism career start, but where did that love for basketball truly get going?
Well, I've always had an affinity for being in the gym, and that was a part of storytelling I enjoyed. But I didn't start just out as an NBA or a basketball reporter, I should say. As a young reporter, and there's probably a little less of this now because of the changes in the newspaper landscape, but I only ever dreamed of just being a newspaper reporter. That's what I wanted to be. It seemed like, you know, if you would assign me to a 40-year contract when I graduated from St. Bonaventure to work at the Buffalo News or Rochester paper or the Hartford Courant, where I worked through high school and college near my hometown, I would have signed a deal for 40 years and never looked back. I mean, and so, but you know, you start covering rec league sports and beer league, you know, Thursday rec piece in the paper on the guys who do, you know, they're in a darts league at a local tavern, you know, whatever. But you learn, and it's a great training ground. And but going to St. Bonaventure and being at a place where basketball was really important, you know, certainly started to push me toward that, and had some internships around basketball in college, college basketball magazines and things like that in the summer. And then my first beat out of Bonaventure, my first job was in Waterbury, Connecticut, covering UConn basketball, covering Jim Calhoun right around when they were sort of ascending. And so I always found myself pulled back to it, and then my career really changed when I went from what was a general columnist where you did everything. You did the NFL, baseball, you got to go to the Olympics, whatever it was. I went to Yahoo to just do NBA, and that really kind of changed the trajectory of things. 10 years at Yahoo doing that, and then almost 8 years at ESPN.
So when you get to that platform, and you know, you're obviously, you know, Twitter is obviously something that kind of helps you get that medium out quickly. You know, how did you, when you're in the NBA fraternity, like, how did you really gather stories and build those relationships with organizations so that that trust could be there?
Yeah, it's a long process over lots of years, and there's really no shortcut with that. It's getting in front of people. It was, when I went to Yahoo, you know, they had a travel budget where I could get out and see people, get in front of them, and it was hard to explain to them what Yahoo even was. The older GMs like Jerry West or Donnie Walsh, they didn't even understand what you were saying. But the younger executives, the younger agents, the younger executives, you know, so you get to know guys like Sam Presti when they were assistant GM in San Antonio, or Tim Connolly, assistant GM in Washington, or player personnel director. And over time, those younger guys like me and the assistant coaches became head coaches, and the player personnel directors became GMs and presidents of teams. But they knew Yahoo because they got their mail there. They went there and looked at the weather, entertainment news. Yahoo was an interesting site. That all changed, but it was kind of like the portal everybody used. It was the first portal I ever, funny, I haven't used that term in a while for anything other than the portal.
Our RNS students really know what the word portal means. That's a big,
but
that's a big phrase.
It was an internet portal. And so Yahoo had a tremendous reach and a vast audience. And they made a decision to get into journalism, news, sports. And there was a group of us, and that all went there, and we all had, you know, we were from some much smaller newspapers, little more unconventional pathways up. We all had a little chip on our shoulder to prove that we, you know, we could be national level guys, and it was a very unique time to be at Yahoo, and we built, you know, you don't build anything at ESPN, it's there, you know, it's this giant, it's this machinery, and you're a spoke in that machinery. But at Yahoo, we built it, and all of us, and we've all, you know, moved on. A bunch of us ended up at ESPN. But I think if you ask any of us what the favorite time in our career, I would tell you it was Yahoo.
Yeah. Do you consider yourself a pioneer in that regard, like coming up and being, it was always, you know, delivered from SportsCenter. It was always delivered from the news, sports talk. Like, do you credit anyone before you that would have like kind of paved the path for that immediate medium to kind of?
Oh yeah, there's so many people before me. I think of, Will McDonough, who's a guy I grew up reading in the Boston Globe, being in Connecticut, who was kind of the first information guy on television. He did NFL for NBC. He was a Boston Globe. His son, Ryan McDonough, became a GM in the league. And I remember one of the best things, the best compliments anyone ever gave me was, Ryan grew up in the newspaper business. I mean, he would joke, he'd answer his phone at home and it was Red Auerbach calling his father, or it was whoever. And, he gave me a great compliment once when I was starting to get to know him and covering the league. He just looked at our profession differently because of growing up with his dad. And so there were a lot of people. To me, I was very much a product of timing. When I went to Yahoo, the internet, the explosion of internet news, Twitter, yes. And it was also with the NBA, it was this unique time when USA Basketball, these guys were getting together. They were starting to talk about playing together. And then 2010 comes, and I went to Yahoo 2007, and there was kind of this build-up to 2008. We're at the Olympics. These guys are talking about like doing stuff together. It happens in 2010, and now there's this whole other sport within the sport about free agency and trade deadline, and with the salary cap now, people are paying attention to, hey, this team's clearing cap space. They must be going after LeBron, or they're going after Chris Paul. Hey, they made another trade, and so people were looking at, now you could cover, that part of it became really interesting to people because it's a very star-driven league, and the creation and formation of those super teams, I think, lent itself to, and I always say my job changed when LeBron and Bosh went to Miami. It just changed because the league changed, and so I was really the beneficiary of good timing. I remember when I was leaving the Bergen Record. I had been at the Bergen Record for 10 years, which is a really good suburban paper in northern New Jersey. And we covered all the New York stuff, and they would send me all over, Olympics and World Series. It was great. But I felt the future was online. I kept turning down bigger newspaper jobs because I think the future is going to be digital, not so much newspaper. And so I went to Yahoo. Dan Wetzel, who was a close friend of mine, we'd come up together. He was already there, and an editor, Dave Morgan, who offered me a chance to come in. But it was still, people weren't leaving good newspaper jobs for the internet. And the editor of our paper lived in my town. And I called him and said, hey, I need to come talk to you. And he goes, I'm home, just come, I'm in the yard or whatever. So I drove 2 minutes over to his house, and I said, hey, I want to let you know I'm leaving. I'm leaving the Record, and thank you for everything. And
was that like a moment where you were like, I really hope this all works out? Or were you nervous at all?
So I tell him I tell him what I'm doing. I'm going to cover the NBA for Yahoo Sports. And he looks at me and he said, well, is there anything we can do? And I said, no, like, I'm not looking for a raise. I've made a decision. Thank you. I had a great run there. And he was a great guy, great editor. And he said, well, I'm happy for you. I wish you the best. And he pauses and he looks at me and says, but I'm worried no one's ever going to hear from you again. And
how'd that work out?
And I shrugged. I remember walking back to my car going, he might be right, but I'm doing this. And I never took it as, it wasn't a slight. He really cared. I never took it as a slight, because I wondered the same thing. But I said, well, I'm gonna do this. And the world was changing. And so, yes, I worked hard at it, and yes, you make your own breaks. But my timing, I think, was really good.
So let's take that moment and go. And in case you guys don't realize, like, I've been talking to Adrian now for quite a few months, and I have to say, in terms of humility, I have never met a more humble human being. So I'm going to try to put him on the spot where he takes some credit for certain things, but it's going to be really hard because he's a very good passer of credit to other people. But the coined term that we all want to talk about is the WOJ bomb, right? And I know I've asked you, you have no idea where it started, which is kind of unique, but I am interested. At what point did you kind of like walk around a little differently, knowing that you just dropped a WOJ bomb?
I honestly, it just sort of became this thing on the internet. I couldn't even tell you what year. To me, a lot of it all blurs together. And so I can't tell you when, but yeah, obviously at some point, I don't know where it started or who, but it became this thing. And the one thing that and sometimes I get asked about what your favorite story was, or I always saw the job as much bigger than the breaking news. And what it became was that's what everybody paid attention to. Yeah. And they just looked at Twitter, and I'm like, I'm writing long form stories on ESPN or Yahoo. I'm doing podcasts. I did a Giannis Antetokounmpo, kind of like a 30 for 30 3-part series, which was kind of the 8 months from when he was discovered by the world in like October, November to draft night when half the league is jockeying to get him. And he had unbelievable recall. We were in the bubble when we sat. I was supposed to fly and see him. I know it's off subject. I was supposed to fly and see him in March, and we were going to sit in Milwaukee to record this, and then COVID happens, and so we're both in the bubble, and then we sat in the bubble, and he had such incredible recall on those 8 months. Like I'd done so many interviews and so much research on it, and I was shocked at how much he could remember. So those are the things to me that were really fulfilling. And so I would just say the breaking news, though, I get our society changed, the appetite for the audience changed, and I get it, and people really valued that. To me, it would be, I always just thought about the next one. I really never spent time thinking about doing an end zone dance on the story, to me, because you were just on to something else. And if you spent more than a few seconds, my heart would always, listen, even when you know you have it right, and there's still a pit in your stomach always, that's something, and if you don't have that pit in your stomach, that's when you can get careless. And so I always was just like, I got it right. Nobody changed their mind in the 10 minutes about, hey, I'm not going to that team anymore, I don't want to do this trade, and because that could happen too. And so then you're just on to the next one.
Yeah, so I mean, that it actually kind of tailors into my next question, because one of the biggest ones that I remember you being one of the first people, obviously, to report on was the cancellation of the NBA season due to COVID. And you were in the bubble, and part of that, not to pivot too much, but what was that experience like? And obviously you have access. Tell us a little bit about that and what you thought it was like.
The bubble was it was the night in Oklahoma City where we said the season suspended, right? And I will tell you this now, Adam Silver had 2 numbers, and at one of the Players Association rookie symposiums, I guess he would put his number up for the players up on the video board, like in the room, and say, "You guys ever need me?" And one of the players screenshot it and posted it, and so I think he changed his number, and I just hadn't deleted it. I had the new one, and I remember that day I was texting him that night, and I could have had that thing earlier, and it was coming back green. When you text, it wasn't, and I realized you're texting the wrong number, dummy. And but yeah, that was a moment in time. And then the next day, I remember I went up to Bristol to I lived like 2 hours away. I grew up in Bristol. I grew up right down the street from ESPN. I mean, literally down the street. My dad, until he passed away, I could go do Sports Center at 6 o'clock and drive over and be sitting at the kitchen table with him at 6:15 and visit with him, and so that was really a nice part of going back to ESPN, because I got to spend more time with him than I would have. And he was in his late 80s at that time, and so. But I remember we went back up to Bristol, and Adam Schefter was there, and the other insiders, and I remember I was sitting on Sports Center set, getting ready to go on the air, and they went to in that moment, right at the top of the hour, Adam was up there too, the NCAA tournament got canceled. And so this was all happening, and you're sitting there going, hey, you're really in the throes of history here. And then eventually we end up in the bubble, and that was a really, it was strange. If any of you guys have ever seen the Truman Show, the movie where every day, at every intersection, the same people are at the intersection, they wave, say hello, and he realizes, this isn't real life, I want a movie set. And what was really interesting about the bubble was, it was like, there's LeBron on his bike, literally. Every day, here comes LeBron on his bike. Going past, right? There's Jaylen Brown, there's Jaylen Brown. Mike Budenholzer was the coach in Milwaukee then.
You're like Truman in the car, looking through the rearview mirror.
Yeah, and Budenholzer would go for a walk without his shirt on, which was interesting. It was hot, but and every day, like it was, you started to see everybody's routines. Yet you're in this arena, this gym, and you've got the best players in the world. And this is an NBA playoff game. And there's 50 people in there. There's the media, there's the front office guys from the teams, some league officials. And, you'd see this incredible, think of, the performances you see in the NBA playoffs, and usually it is the backdrop of, just incredible roar. I saw some of the guys with the Raptors gear coming in. Think of Kawhi's shot against the Sixers and the sound that comes up in an arena. And you'd see these moments and then just silence. And it was like you were watching a game on a movie set. I never got used to it in the bubble. All the way to the finals, and there's a championship. Somebody would, and just silence. And there would be some clapping on the bench, and they run back down the court.
Where is the most interesting place that you would break like one of the most biggest NBA stories for people to consume? Like what would have been the most awkward spot where you're like, I gotta post this now, this has to be posted?
My wife's here, she might have a better answer to that than I do.
You want me to answer that?
Yeah, I do, yeah.
Probably when we had the kids at Disney. That popped in my mind.
Got in trouble for that one, didn't you?
There was very little battery time then on the BlackBerry messengers. And I remember I would have to, it was so bad. I would, you'd find by the there's the bathroom, there's the food court outside, and then there's the restrooms, and then there's a plug, in the gravel up against the wall, and I'm sitting there charging my phone. I remember we took the kids one year, and it was the Gilbert Arenas gun saga. And I remember I finally broke the story on New Year's Eve, at a New Year's Eve party. I finally had the story in, I got the final confirmations I needed. But the whole week leading up to it, working on it, was at Disney with the kids. And it's not a great memory. It's not, I don't look at it and laugh at it. I look at it, your family is there to be with you, and you're physically present, but you are not mentally present. And sometimes I think it's better for them if you just weren't there at all.
Well, I think, that was one of my questions I was going to ask later, and obviously your lovely wife has definitely helped you out with that particular event. But, I can speak to myself. I think I've mopped floors, I've worked a canteen, I've coached a game, and I was a chauffeur this morning for you, and now I'm hosting a Fireside. Look at me. So I'm aware of wearing hats, and my wife is certainly here, but what, the whole concept of the balance of it all, and the work-life balance, if you're looking back at your career, especially when you're on top, and you want to stay relevant, and all of us that compete, we want to compete to win, and that's just in our DNA. At what point, and obviously you retired from that to take on a whole new other list of stressors, which we'll get into, but at what point did perhaps it just become a little too hard or too much? Or did it ever?
It's a good question. I just felt like I could have kept doing it, and I just knew for me to do it at the level I wanted to do it at. I know what, for me, what was required to do it at that level, and simply I didn't want to meet that requirement anymore. I didn't want to, I'm too competitive, and the one thing in changing from that profession to this profession that I didn't lose, and you have to be extremely competitive, and there's so much more competition in this world in lots of ways. You know, you just, that competitive fire still burns, and it drives me now for different reasons, and doing what I'm doing at Bonaventure. But yeah, I just felt at the end, it just felt like a lot of the same over and over, and it didn't, while I never imagined doing anything else, I certainly never imagined taking on the role I'm in now. It wasn't like I dreamed of working in basketball. I just wanted to be a journalist until I wasn't, and it wasn't as much fun anymore. And I didn't want, the best reason I could think of staying, I had 3 years left of my contract. The best reason I could come up with was the money, and that wasn't a good enough reason.
Yeah, and I think that's, you know, if I had to take anything from you, meeting you the first time, you know, the concept of fame, money, stature is everything you're not. I think, you know, when you peel back the layers of fandom and, you know, what people see superficially, it's, you know, it's, you know, they always say, well, you know, you be careful who you meet your heroes, and be careful meeting your heroes. And obviously, for you working in basketball, I think all of us that are following basketball can put you on some kind of platform that, you know, you were someone that we looked up to get the information that we loved, right? We love. Moving on to the next chapter of your life, was there a moment going into the Bonaventure role as GM where, you know, you're in there for a couple weeks, and we're going to get into the kids because, you know, when you're just putting stories out there, it's probably a lot easier than working with, you know, 18, 19, 20-year-old men that should be men, that are working to become men, that are trying to learn what a man is. But did you miss, just to wrap up the ESPN side, was there anything at ESPN you missed?
Nothing. I just...
On to the next one.
And I don't mean it in that I didn't like it or I didn't I did. I just knew I was done. I just knew the last year I was there, I just kind of felt like I kept hitting these mileposts, right? In my mind, this is the last trade deadline. This is the last draft. This is the last free agency. And then, you know, I told my agent, and obviously Amy, and we talked about it, and he said, well, just take the summer and see that you still feel that way. And I said, yeah, and I had basically told Bonaventure, we're going to do this. And there was never a moment, there's not been a moment in the year where I say, now I miss, like when you know, Adam Schefter is a good friend. I miss the camaraderie I had with like Schefter and Pete Thamel and Jeff Passan, who, like 3 of my best friends. And you know, I helped Passan and Thamel come to ESPN. Adam helped me come to ESPN. But I still talk to him and I see him. But, you know, and they'll call me, hey, I've got this situation. And I enjoy that. Hey, I've got this situation. Here's how I'm going to handle it. What do you think? And I still get a kick out of it because of those guys. But there's never a moment where when I hang up the phone, I go, oh, I wish I was there. I'm so, part of leaving ESPN and what made it easier was I was going towards something that was really important. That was important to me. And so if I didn't have the Bonaventure, if I wasn't going to become the GM at Bonaventure, I probably would have stayed another year at ESPN. And I am positive it would have been a mistake if I did.
Yeah. So you say it's the move to Bonaventure was important. So you went to Bonaventure, you met your wife at Bonaventure, you both grad there. You have a lot of memories on that campus. You know, I got to know that when I was walking around campus with you while I was down there. So you walk back on campus. You're in a new role, and this is where me and you can have like a really casual conversation, because now this is the world that I know. Not even in a new role for you, a new role, period. So for those that might not know college athletics and the Wild West state that it is currently in, like, how are you managing kind of trying to bring some formality to the NIL deals, recruitment, young man's egos, et cetera, et cetera? Like, how is that role and the new challenges, like, how are you taking that on?
Yeah, and that's been, I've done so much learning in the last year. And that's what's been, I really enjoyed that part of it, to learn something brand new at 56 years old and take things that I thought maybe help me be successful at something else. That I do think there's a number of things that help me in this, but I also know I have tremendous blind spots that I need to be honest about myself with, and really, you got to learn so much. But there are some things that felt like my old job that I thought transferred, like being a reporter. This job is reporting. It's piecing a story together about the people that you're recruiting, about the group you have. And I've been around so many really great organizations and coaches and GMs and agents, and I've been in the middle of a million negotiations between an agent and a team, a million of them, where at times I felt like I was refereeing between two people. But I saw what worked in negotiations, what didn't work. I've seen the dynamic around teams that have made teams really successful and ones that have caused them to collapse. And one thing in covering pro sports, I always believe this, and it's what, there's two things to me that tear apart organizations. And it's how do I word this? It's the grab for credit and the passing of blame. Those two things, when it's going well, everybody fighting to take credit for what's going well and their role in it. Or when it's not going well, hey, it wasn't me, it was him, it was her. And the places that can avoid those two extremes, because in almost any organization, you're going to deal with both. You know, it's never a straight line, right? It's the ones who exist in the middle, where we're in this together. We've got each other's back. You have the humility to learn from mistakes. The really good GMs in the league that I've been around will tell you about their failures and what they learned from them. Not, well, that was the owner, I didn't want to make that trade. I didn't want to hire that coach, that was him. Or, you know, and said, no, I blew it, and here's why I blew it, and I'm not going to do that. I'm going to try not to make that mistake again. So being around all those things was helpful, but in a lot of ways, to me, the stakes are so much bigger, because these are people's lives. And I took my job very seriously at ESPN and journalism. But if I didn't break a story, or, like, the world went on, somebody did. Here, like, you know, people's futures, and that's what I love about it, and having John's a great example of it. And, you know, you and I went back and forth all year, and I get it, our coaches are in the season, I'm trying to get them to go see John, but we're fighting through the season, and we did see John as more of a long-term, you know, we really looked at the long view of John's development and growth, not necessarily someone who could come in the Atlantic 10-day one and play. That, you know, hasn't played basketball as long as many of our other guys.
And I think what people, like Johnny Potikin is who he's referencing. He was one of my players last year, for those of you who don't know. And I think what's unique about you and how our relationship kind of developed was the honesty. Like, there was never a time where you ever told me that wasn't the idea. A lot of coaches did tell me different things, and then, you know, randomly one day, not hear back from them, or that conversation ended. Like, so in your role as GM, and obviously, you know, that comes with a lot of learning. You mentioned, like, learning at 56 years old. I mean, that's something that's, you know, as a teacher, I admire. But was there any NBA franchise where you look at that franchise and you say, like, I really want to figure out a way to do it like franchise X, because I feel like this organization kind of has the things and the skills that we could find success with here.
The answer is yes, but it's more individual people, because we don't have the infrastructure anywhere near, even, we don't necessarily even have the infrastructure that many of our competitors in college have. But we have a track record at St. Bonaventure. We have, we don't necessarily have the facilities that others in the Atlantic 10 have. We don't have the budget. We don't have the NIL. But we have a coach who's over 19 years produced 3 NBA players in the last decade who played parts of the NBA, 10 first-team All-Atlantic 10 players, and I think we have a formula there, and then a university where our guys graduate, and so for us, it's our environment, but the NBA GMs that I've been around that I really learned from were the ones who they weren't up. Lawrence Frank, who's the president of the Clippers, I've known Lawrence since he was a coach with the Nets, and he had a line that would always stay with me. He said, "Every job is," it's something to the effect of, "Every job is everybody's job," meaning, if you're the GM of the team or you're the president of the team and you look down on the court and you see a player shooting and there's nobody rebounding for him, go down and rebound for him. Doesn't matter what your title is. And so last year, through the year, I go back to the office at 9:30, 10 at night, especially if Amy was not, she'd be back and forth to Jersey more. And so when I'm there alone, I'm just working. And so I come back at 10 o'clock at night and see one of our guys in the gym shooting. And usually there's a manager, but sometimes guys go back late. They're just, let me work off some steam. I'm thinking about it. I'm just going to go back to the gym. And, I'd go down and just start rebounding. And it's a good chance to talk. What's going on in your life? And that stuff, like those are the things, not so much the negotiation. The negotiation stuff's just being honest. Like, I don't play games. There's so many negotiating classes, all the guys. It's so funny. There was a time in the NBA where, the Spurs, R.C. Buford's a great friend of mine, and he spawned, built the Spurs dynasties, is good of a general manager. You think of what he's done in San Antonio. And he spawned all these other GMs, and they all had this negotiating style where, they were like, they don't say anything. And so the negotiating tactic is they want you to do the talking. So you get this awkward silence on the phone. And I would get on the phone with RC and I go, RC, I'm not trying to make a trade with you. Like, will you talk to me? You called me. What are we talking about here? But it's how they dealt with each other, and it was so funny. I don't think about any of that stuff. I just think about, here's what I have. Here's what I think the value is. I'm not trying to negotiate you up or down. Here's what I think I can do. And if we can do it, great. If not, the thing that I've learned in this, and that really bothers me in this world, with agents, and you mentioned Elias, who works with John. We've got 3 of his young men on our team, and I love working with him because he cares about the growth and development of his players. It's not about today's NIL or tomorrow. Is a player going to get better? Is he going to grow? It's the guys who want to play the long game with a player's life. And, some of the NIL agents, you'll get on the phone with them, and I'll come across a player, and I might have seen some video, and I've seen just some stats and video, and have a cursory knowledge, but there's so many players in the portal, and so you call to get some, hey, where are you in your process? I want to learn more about them. And the first 10 seconds you get on the phone with them, they might say to you, what would you pay? And I said, what would I pay? I just learned this kid's name 15 minutes ago. And I haven't had a conversation with him. He hasn't had a conversation with us. I don't know what he's all about. Why would I put a numeric value on that? But in many cases, it's going to be who's going to pay the most. And I respect that business model. And if we were at a high major and we had high major money, maybe my conversations would start more. I don't know. I hope they wouldn't, but
I don't think they would.
yeah. And so to me, it's like, All of those parts of the job are just try to be transparent with people, be honest. You may not like the answer, and you negotiate with players. Sometimes it's their family, sometimes it's their agent, sometimes in a couple cases it's the kid itself, and it's not pleasant because we all might have a different value on financially, but that's what the job has become now.
Yeah, no, and I think the big thing with the NIL, the general manager position, coaches adjusting to, it'd be difficult for me to go into a locker room, like at St. Bonaventure, one guy's getting $250,000 and one guy's getting $50,000, and trying to maintain that culture, because young men, unfortunately, as we know, they tend to value that price tag and not necessarily the relation first and foremost. So when I was on campus, I was really happy with the coaching staff philosophy of like everyone kind of doing everything together. Like, you guys are all together. Like, you don't have, or don't seem to have, like a separate office in a separate building. Like, you are part of the together. And I remember walking around campus, and it was always like, hey Frank, hey this, hey that. Like, all the players were still there, and they would always come. So, that not having that divide. But if you fast track, and we'll keep this brief because I want to give anybody that has a question and they want to ask, we certainly want to give you a chance. So we got about 2 more minutes, but very quickly, if you could say 5 years from now, in a perfect world, classic question, you're St. Bonaventure still, you're GM, what would you call success for you? And I know, and I'm speaking predominantly as a program, because as a coach, I'll tell you right now, success to me is maintaining good, strong relationships with all my alumni, all my guys, and watching them grow and develop and have their families and professions. But as a program, trying to build this new thing in this new era, what would success look like at St. Bonaventure?
5 years from now would be John getting his master's degree and finishing, having been All Atlantic 10, having helped us win. It really is. I think for John, he was somebody who, my credibility, I hope my credibility improved with our staff as the year went on. I'm proud of the guys we brought in. It wasn't me. We do it as a team. We recruit together. We identify players together. But John was somebody that I kept coming back to with them and said, we've got to, and we finally got up and saw him. One of the other coaches got up and saw him up in Fort Erie. I had seen you guys in Fort Erie against them. I remember I drove through a snowstorm.
You did?
Drove through a snowstorm, went over the bridge, and was looking at Fort Erie, but I wanted to see John that night because I was aware of him. And
for those who don't know, WOJ went from one of the most popular online people to just appearing in some of the most random gyms across Canada, period.
This is true. This is a true fact. I went from Stephen A. picking my hotels to AAA picking my hotels. The Stephen A. would decide where we would stay on in the NBA Finals, and he'd send his guys ahead to make sure, he'd have some say. So last year I'd be recruiting, and so it went from, it was great. Like, it went from in ESPN, they send you car service, and you fly first class, and you stay at a 4 or 5 star. I think my contract, it said I could stay in a 5-star hotel. I don't think I ever did it once. I was embarrassed to do it. I'm staying at the Marriott. It's fine. What do I?
This is where I give a Chateau St. John plug right now.
Oh,
Where he's staying tonight.
Hey, we're doing great.
Shout out Ryan McMaster if he's happened to be here.
Yeah. And so, I would say though, just for us in Bonaventure, this is a really difficult landscape for us. And a big part of why I wanted to come back and do this was to help Bonaventure and help our school figure out how are we going to navigate this. Basketball is really important at Bonaventure, not just to the athletic department, but to the university. And many of us believe, I do, that if we didn't play basketball in the Atlantic 10 at the level we do and what it means to our alumni and to our fan base, I worry about whether our school would be in existence in a decade. If we just said we're going to de-emphasize this, it just brings everybody together. We have 2,000 students at St. Bonaventure, undergrad, and we're in the Atlantic 10. VCU, I think I said this earlier today, VCU has 30,000 students. We have 30,000 living alumni. And yet, last year when we beat them on New Year's Eve, we had beaten them 7 of the last 9 times, and they've been a great program. They might have had one player on their team who made more than our whole team. We can compete and do this. We've got to be efficient, smart, resourceful. So in 5 years from now, I want, if the program is relevant, if our building is packed, if we have good guys who, like John, and who value our environment. So much of what I tried to bring to recruiting this year was recruiting players from great programs, great coaches, winning environments, but environments where they were cared for beyond basketball, that things. And so 2 of our players from Italy, our point guard from Moscow. Now I couldn't obviously go over and see him, and I tried to get all the intel I could around that, which was a challenge because you can't get in a plane and go there and see him. And we did it through Zoom, and I did it through his agents and whatever. But when I'm going to make a bet on a young guy like John, it's because of the environment he had. And I mean that, Coach, that he had you in his life, that he had this community in his life. And he was so, I remember standing in the hallway at Fort Erie.
Fort Erie, yep.
And John was just looking through me. He had this piercing look of, give me a chance, offer me a scholarship. And he would always say to me, we'd stay in touch, and I said, John, I don't know how quickly this is going to go. And I think I started to say before, we were, you're focused in the portal on the guys who we need tomorrow to help us win this year. And then you kind of start backing up from there and go, who are some longer term? And John, I just kept coming back to John as this longer term. But yes, physically, John has some great gifts that very few of our guys do. What really, the 2 things that really kept pulling me back to John was his work ethic, and that he had been in an environment with you where he had structure, he had discipline, where he was coached very hard and accept hard coaching. And I said, those are the kids that I want to, if we're going to go down swinging on those guys. I didn't want what I don't, I've seen it too much in sports, and I really believe in this, character matters. And you can talk yourself into talent and say, well, it'll be different with us. He's had these issues. He hasn't been a good teammate. He hasn't worked always as hard, but it'll be different in our environment. Guess what? It probably won't. It probably won't. You know that, right? Yeah. And so that's why John, and we've seen it, he is in the gym, 6 a.m. He's, I come in my office as early as I think I can get in the office. I hear the ball bouncing in the gym, and many days it's already John, and it speaks, and that's why I think he's going to have success with us.
And I think that will be, every other guy's 5-year plan to have that, masters, A10, that is something that if you're wishing that on everybody, that is quality programming. It's not just a one size for now. It's not just fit the hole now, it's fit the hole for 5 years. And that's something, me personally, as a coach placing kids, that it's fleeting. They want the now. They want to win now.
It's hard. That's our society now.
So with that in mind, I just want to say, you've been a National Sports Writer of the Year 3 times, Tony Kubek Award winner, Associated Press Editors Awards, etc., etc., etc. But you can finally put on your wall of fame that you've been a Fireside guest at the Milner Invitational. So let's say thank you to Rob. Now, there's no pressure here, but does anyone have a question? And if someone does have a question, I'm going to get one of my guys to rush down here. Well, it's probably easier to say it out loud, but if you need the mic. But does anyone have a question that they're dying to ask boys? And if they don't, that's okay, but now's the time. Yes, sir, Mr. McCullough.
You find that universities in the States are coming and seeing more Canadian kids over the last couple of years?
There's no question, it's been our biggest priority since I came back. We've had a lot of success at Bonaventure. When you think back, maybe the last 40 years, all the really, really good teams we've had, I can't really think of any that didn't have a really good Canadian player or more. And we're doing a public practice at Humber College in Toronto next Sunday, which is where Frank Mitchell, who's our center, started his career. But being in Canada is huge for us. Like just as I said, in this week, I started my week in Calgary, I've been in Toronto, and I'm all the way, east here. There's so much talent in Canada. Bonaventure's history has mostly been, Andrew Nicholson was our best, probably our, certainly one of the two best players at the very least of the last 25, 30 years. First round pick in the NBA, still playing overseas. We had been out of the NCAA tournament for 22 years, and he brought us back. Just an incredible guy and student. And so, but Toronto, Montreal, Quebec, obviously the reigning NBA MVP is Montreal. You could go down the list of, so many players from that area. And then Calgary, going out west, Calgary, Edmonton, those programs are really on the move. And then you come back east and, so for us, we're 90 minutes from the border, we're 3 hours from Toronto, and our goal is to be Canada's team at Bonaventure. And we have 3 Canadians on our roster this year. If things had broken a little differently in recruiting, we could have easily had 5 or 6. And so for us, it's a huge part of trying to recruit and bring guys in.
Anyone else? Mr. Viana?
I'm curious, I think it was around 2013, there was some rumblings about Kobe going to the Knicks. And I'm wondering how close was that actually to happen? And then also a follow-up is kind of like, what was your relationship with him? Because wasn't there some, like, he didn't like you dropping his information without his permission?
I had a Kobe gave me a lot of credibility in the NBA. We had a great relationship. I got to know him 2008 Olympics, Beijing. You would spend 45, 50 minutes a day, and I was starting to ascend, I guess, at Yahoo. And we built a great relationship there until the end. I talked to Kobe a lot about the Knicks, and Kobe was funny. He had a lot of, there was a stretch where it was acrimonious with Jim Buss, who was kind of running the Lakers before Jeannie took over. He had a much better relationship with Jeannie. And he talked about would he go to New York with Phil. And I remember one time we were in LA, we were at dinner with Tim Grover, who was his longtime trainer. And he said, I think the Lakers, I think they're going to amnesty me, which means at the time there was a provision in the contract where you could basically just dissolve a contract. And it was like Kobe, the Lakers are not going to amnesty you. They're going to amnesty me. Jim doesn't, they're going to amnesty me, and then I'm going to go sign with the Knicks if they do it. I said, number one, they would burn the city down. You're not going to get amnesty. Number two, if somebody has cap space, they could claim you. No, I would talk them out of doing it. I go, okay. And so, but in his heart, he loved LA, and he was always going to be a Laker. But he loved the Garden, and he loved New York. And I wouldn't say it was in motion or something that really had legs. He did have that summer where he asked for a trade. They got pretty far down the road. The one that I ended up reporting on years later was Detroit. They had an agreement with Detroit. There was a trade that the Lakers front office agreed on, and Kobe went and met with Jerry Buss, and Jerry talked him out of it, and they went to bed that night. So. But after that summer, I'm trying to remember what year that was, and then the other one was the Clippers. This is funny. He lived in Orange County. He lived down in Newport, and his commute to LA was sometimes he had a helicopter he would take, and he would land on the roof of the Ritz. And then he had a sports car he'd come rolling through with, but he hated the commute, he hated the traffic. And there was a time where the Clippers were talking about moving down to Anaheim. And I think the Lakers might have played still then a game or two down there, and he loved it because the commute. And he said to me, if the Clippers move to Anaheim, I'm gonna go play for them. I said, you are not leaving the Lakers, and this is the Clippers, this was the Donald Sterling Clippers. I said, wait, I said, are you really telling me that you're gonna leave the Lakers for the Clippers for a shorter commute to work? He said, yes. But he played for the team he always wanted to play for.
Listen, if there was a private school on the other side of that bridge that you haven't crossed yet, everyone knows that a bad commute will force people to do absolutely anything. Is anyone else? Yes, Mr. McDonald.
Hi, well, my name's Colin. I got a question on, what was the most, surprising, trade or, move, when you were working in the NBA? If you didn't work in the NBA, what, topic or sport would you pick?
Good question. I could have easily have landed covering some other.
I'm just gonna stop right now. Just fun fact, just in case you guys didn't know. Woj, I believe you were a collegiate athlete yourself at the Division I level for 4 weeks, 3 weeks?
3 days of tryouts. 3 days of baseball tryouts at St. Bonaventure.
Almost made the show.
Yeah.
Very close.
Yeah, I remember became one of my best friends and a close friend of my wife and I, my friend Bob Rachel, and we both tried. He was from Jersey, but Bob went there with designs on making the team. He had gotten recruited. He was a good pitcher, and I was a high school catcher who just had no concept of what Division I baseball physically might look like. And I remember, I was probably at the time 160 pounds, and I'm 5'10" and a half, and I show up for tryouts, and the starting catcher is 6'2", 215, throwing bullets on the second. And you're going, oh boy, this is. And so Bob tried out. We both tried out. I knew very quickly this is going to be short-lived. But Bob went through, and I remember I caught him in trials. I was his catcher there for a bit, and so I remember back then they would announce a team by simply, I think the coach just posted the roster on the door to his office. So it was like Friday at 3:30. They're going to post a team. And I remember we were over in our dorm, and he goes, are you going to walk over and see? I go, Bob, I don't need to walk over and see. I know what name's not on that door. And he goes, well, I'm going to walk over. I said, good luck, Bob. And I could still see Bob walking across campus. And I went back in my room like 5 minutes later. Bob comes walking back. He's like, all right, let's go out to the bar.
Anybody else? Andrew?
It was a two-part question.
Oh, sorry.
Biggest surprise. I would say one, I don't know, surprise, yes. I would say one that was interesting was, and how it played out, was the Paul George, because it impacted so much more. Paul George trade to the Clippers, because Kawhi Leonard was waiting for them to get a Paul George trade done before he would commit, or he was threatening to go to the Lakers. Right, so there's Toronto, right? So it's the Toronto thing.
That one hits hard. I think.
Yeah, I know. And I just talked to Masai the other day. Masai was somebody else who gave me a lot of credibility. If you asked Amy, if you put on her list of top 3 or 4 favorite people that, she got to know all those guys, and, Masai is a special guy, and he, and it was funny, I got to know him when he was a young GM doing the Carmelo Anthony trade in Denver, and I was still pretty new to this, and he was coming up, and anyway, but that night, Paul George, I started to get wind that that was in the works and I knew I had to kind of wait it out. Between Oklahoma City and the Lakers, or the Clippers, I knew, like, are we gonna get there that night? It was like 2 a.m. when finally the trade was done. And then immediately, now they called Kawhi, they said, we got the trade done. Kawhi said, I'm coming, and it was all like 2:15 in the morning. I was in Bristol in our studio, and I remember there was there was an earthquake, there was a tremor in Vegas that night, and a friend of mine, Cassidy Hubbard, who was our NBA reporter, she was doing the, in the arena doing the Summer League games, and I knew I was really close to breaking the story, and I remember the game was still going on. I think I texted her and I said, Cassidy, get ready, I'm gonna have something big here, and they're gonna come to you on it. I just gave her a tee up, which I would do with some of our TV people, especially people I really trusted. And like 2 minutes after I told her that, like they felt the earthquake. She's like, "What the hell is happening?" And then the trade came. Yeah.
As someone who had thousands of people tweeting at you all day, every day, is there a fan base you don't miss? Is there most delusional or annoying Twitter fan base?
It's a good question. I learned to adjust my mentions that I only could see the comments of people who I followed. Otherwise, it can be
Philly fans?
Laker fans are tough. I think there's this general feeling if people don't like the news that you're reporting, that somehow you dictated that was going to be the news. I said, guys, I didn't make the trade. I didn't fire the coach. I didn't hire the coach. But you know what? It's what made it great. People cared, and like I had that job, and you get paid really well to do it, and you're gonna take some stuff, and it's like if you don't like it, then like that job you're gonna get criticized. You can think it's fair, you can think it's unfair, but like when someone's gonna, and I don't mean to be they're gonna pay that much money, like that's part of what you have to deal with. And if you don't like it, then don't take the money. And so finally one day I said, I'm not taking the money anymore. And that wasn't because of the criticism and all the other stuff, but it's just, that's part of the job too. You can't just take the good parts. You can't just take the parts of, hey, people recognize you and they might say they like your work or they read your book or whatever. Part of it, just like a coach, like a teacher, students that you love, there's students that are challenges. You don't just get the good ones. And that's part of it. And so why are we supposed to be special in our profession? So there's a lot of whining. My wife knows this. She heard it all. Whining from GMs, whining from agents, whining from players, whining from sports writers, and whatever I became. But we had a pretty good thing. And so I appreciated, even if people were critical, I appreciated that they cared and that they were reading and they were watching. Because if they weren't, I'd have to get a real job. And I definitely didn't want to do that.
We got one more up here, but just so you know, we do only have the good ones here at RNS. That's a fun fact. Yeah. Yep. Oh, you.
I was wondering, can you comment on like the challenges around recruiting and retaining players in the age of the transfer portal?
It's a great question, and I think about it every day. The retaining part is what goes into retaining players. What the crutch that I don't want us to fall into is he just left for the money. They offered him more money, and he's going to leave. And I think we are not being honest with ourselves if we think that's the only reason always. Now, sometimes it might be, but even in recruiting last year, I would try to go back when we didn't get a guy. And there were a couple instances where we offered a little more money or we offered a lot less. I try to go back and do a little bit of an autopsy on why didn't we get him, and I try to go back to the agent to, if I got to know a family member well and say, where did we go wrong? Did we make a mistake? And not fall back into, oh, well, they paid him more money and that's why. because I don't think you're learning. And so retaining is the most important thing. Our most important recruits this year are the ones we have on campus. Like I think the window has changed. It used to be 4 years. Like, I want John to be a 5-year player at St. Bonaventure. I think that can happen. I hope it can happen. But I know we can't have a roster of 5-year, 4-year players. That's not realistic anymore. And so we've got to find ways to give guys value beyond the money. Like, there's going to be limits with the money, and that's that they're going to find growth and development and fulfillment. And to me, we have to be thinking about that every day, about how are we serving these guys, so that, you know, other places are less appealing. And for us, we can't turn the roster over every year. I don't think there's any way to win that way. And I don't want I want these guys to stay. I don't think we can keep all of them, but there's no more important. The retaining, to me, so far in just 1 year, the retaining is harder than recruiting. There's opportunities to get good players.
Yeah. I think we have time for one more. Alexa.
As GM at Bonaventure, how, if at all, do you work with the women's team, and what does that look like for you?
Was that a ChatGPT question?
No,
Did you just
I
do
wrote
that?
it in my notes.
No, so Jim Crowley, the women's coach, is and his wife Monty are really close friends of my wife and I. Jim was the women's coach at Bonaventure, had great success, went to Providence and has come back. And my first job at Bonaventure as a student was working as a sports information assistant for the women's basketball team. They had just gone to Division I, and the coach at that time still lives in town. She worked in administration. She's still a really good friend of ours. And so I try to, wherever I can, whether it's recruiting contacts overseas. When I've been in Canada and I go into a school, and sometimes I've met the women's coach there with the boys coach, and make sure that I can go back to Jim and his staff and say, hey, this is a place you might want to think of recruiting internationally. When I've been out, I always think of them when I'm in different places. And, you know, like a few weeks ago, we did a Zoom with an NBA team about player development and how they chart player development. It was one of the things, especially if we're going to have a red shirt, you know, for a player like potentially John or another, how can we chart their growth for them when they don't have games and they don't have the measuring stick other guys might have every day? What can we put in place so that they're feeling like they're competing? And our women's staff, our entire women's staff was on with it. And I learn a lot from them. The women's attention to detail in recruiting is great. And so I'm always over there picking their brains about visits. They generally have a better attention to detail. Lindsay Gottlieb's the women's coach at USC, is a close friend of ours. And I'm always calling her about, hey, how do you handle this? There's so much to learn from it. So, you know, it's a small school and we care about each other. And, you know, the baseball coach will have recruits in, and he said, hey, there's a family who might want to meet you and talk to you. So I'm always meeting with baseball players. So it's a fun part of the job.
You're an alumni. Listen, guys, I want us to say thank you one more time to Adrian for being here. It's been a long day for you, so thank you for being here. And
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for